Hey everybody, this is a lesson on how to solve polynomial equations. What makes this video different than future videos or lessons is that all of these equations are factorable. So you're using that concept that we've been really trying to help you learn, and now we're going to apply it. So here is the essential question: how can I use factoring to solve polynomial equations? And then how are zeros represented on graphs? So you have 4 learning targets today. You need to be able to factor higher power polynomials. You need to understand that finding zeros is the same action as solving for the missing variable. So zeros, big word. Understand the zeros represent x-intercepts on a graph. And then solve polynomials with real and also complex. Okay, so I have some examples of the learning targets. I wouldn't write them down. I would just make sure you have a visual of what you're doing. So here you can see the I. So some of these problems will and sometimes they won't have complex roots in them, but you need to definitely be used to them. Okay, this one I would write some notes for. What I would write notes for is the following. Okay, so understanding that zeros represent the x-intercepts on the graph, because we're going to be graphing these fairly soon. And when you go through the whole problem and you factor it, down at the bottom, here are your x's on the graph. You can see here's 0 for the x, and then you have -6 and you have -2. And this is what's super important right here. You'd think it was just the solution, but what you also need to keep track of is where they came from. So like what factors they came from. So I'm going to actually just write on top of it which factors they came from. So that I would do some kind of a sketch. That's a newer idea for you. Okay, so here's our first problem. I'm going to make sure that I talk you through this one. All the problems are different slightly. So the following problems, there's not going to be sound. There might be some music, but there won't be any sound, and that's because about 90% of this is review. So make sure you're taking notes, make sure you upload them in the appropriate place, and then you're going to do Delta Math practice on it. Make sure you write out your problems and then upload them to Google Classroom like you're supposed to. Okay, so what's going on now is we're going to be solving each one of these factors. So this is the new stuff, and we're going to set it equal to 0. And I know you've done this in other classes. So we're solving, and then what I want you to understand though is what the actual solutions mean. So just go through and do the algebra. So this would be plus or minus, but since it's 0, it's just going to be 0. And then this is where you're going to get the complex root. And I hope that feels okay to you. And I'm going to make sure I write all the steps for you. And then if you recall, that negative sign becomes I. So what is that? 3, so plus or minus 3, and then make sure you put the I in the back. And then what I want you to connect is this idea here. When you find an x-intercept, you let y equal 0. And even though I didn't have a y here, that's essentially what's going on, which is why the solutions on the graph correspond with the x-intercepts, because the height of the graph is 0 when you have x-intercepts. So that's how it's going to connect onto the graph. So I'm going to have you practice that even though you don't actually have to do it yet. So I'm making a number line here, and what you're going to do is only graph the real numbers. You only graph the real numbers. The complex roots don't show up on the real number line. So I'm going to have you practice that so you can make those connections. 3 and then -3. And then we have to decide, is the graph going like this? Could it be something like that? I don't know right now, and so we'll wait for that at a different time. Okay, the rest of the problems I'm not going to be talking because, again, a lot of this is review.